The Dark Side of the Moon. The Dark Side of the Moon. The Prism. It's the first thing that a lot of people notice whenever they see the cover of this album, and they recognize it instantaneously. The Dark Side of the Moon is one of the most decorated albums of all time as far as sales are concerned, accolades, and all things that pertain to music achievement. This is the breakout hit. This is the huge album that Pink Floyd had been perhaps searching for ever since the departure of Syd Barrett. This is the album that seemed to have the most oomph to it. This was an album that they were crafting while Obscured by Clouds was also being made. In fact, these sessions for Dark Side of the Moon started first prior to the Obscured by Clouds sessions. However, whenever it came to the overall brevity of the project, the Dark Side of the Moon certainly was the project that was getting the most of the ideas, not to mention a core amount of the focus. And whenever Dark Side of the Moon was released, this was an album that was instantly recognized as a fantastic affair. This album has drawn so many comparisons with many different things. Of course, there are the syncing up things where everything's supposed to work concurrently together and all that stuff, but, you know, it's all dependent upon how high you want to get one night and how much you want to fuck with both Dark Side of the Moon and I think it's the Wizard of Oz or something, or Star Wars, fuck, I don't know. Doesn't matter to me. You know why it doesn't matter to me? Because we're here to talk about the music. Dark Side of the Moon is an album that at some points I find to be curiously overrated, but at other points I find to be exactly at its proper place as one of the best-selling and best-received albums of all time. Not to mention the album that has spent the most weeks of all time on the Billboard 200 chart. This is an album that is filled with a nice flow to it. It flows as one piece of music as was the intention. This is a conceptual album that talks about greed, it talks about corruption, it talks about insanity, it talks about personality. This is a gripping affair, this is an engaging affair, this is an emotional affair. This is an album that actually encapsulates just about everything and anything that you would want to have on one album. If you are striving to create a rock album, this is an album to model yourself after, mainly because it is able to achieve all the things that you need in order to have an engaging and breathtaking rock album. You take songs that have concepts such as time and money, where it seems like they're just going after simple ideas as far as lyrical content is concerned, and perhaps even simple ideas with just the melodies and everything whatsoever, but it's just something that grips you. These are instantly recognizable songs. These are songs that have very catchy, very quirky musical sides to them. And it seems, perhaps with time, almost trivial and silly that they use a wall of alarm clocks going off to signal the introduction of the song, but in fact it's quite perfect considering you know exactly what's going on. Same is true with money. Whenever you hear that familiar cadence, that sound of cash register doors opening and the sounds of money in the air, and then you hear that all too familiar dum dum da dum 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 da dum da dum dum. You know what's coming. Us and Them, a fantastic affair that's very, very emotional. Really documents that emotional side. Really talking about war. You can tell that there's definitely a resemblance there. Once again, to Roger Waters' father. You have songs such as Speak to Me and Breathe that have beautiful haunting melodies. Of course, we have Breathe that is revisited within time. We have Any Color You Like. We have breathtaking instrumentals. We have vocal prowess. We have vocal passion. This whole album is something that could be a discussion point for longer than just a short video such as this one. However, we're here to compress this very quickly. This is, and could be considered to be, progressive music, progressive rock's opus, the magnum opus. The one that everyone is going to talk about. The reason why progressive rock will never die will be because of Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. Now you might wonder why I say that sometimes I feel that this is curiously overrated. I think it's because too many people, whether they be fans of the band or just casual fans of the music in general, really hold this album on a pedestal as though it can't be touched. as though no matter what any band, no matter what even Pink Floyd themselves were able to accomplish prior to this or after this, nothing was going to be able to dethrone Dark Side of the Moon. It was always going to be at that tippy top. It was always going to be the gold medal winner, to the point that even if someone were to come close, that band would still get the gold, and Dark Side of the Moon would be elevated to platinum status. Well, it was elevated to platinum status in sales many, many a times. But that's not the point. I believe that the curious overrating of this album exists only in the eyes and ears of some beholders. Because while I feel that Dark Side of the Moon is a fantastic, flowing album, one that is an essential piece of any musician's library, and I'm not talking just progressive rock, I'm talking, and I'm not just talking classic rock, I'm talking any music fan's library, I don't feel that this is the best Pink Floyd album. And I'm willing to admit that. While I find this album to be dashingly perfect, while I find this album to have all the elements that you look for on a great record, I find another to be superior. I find Dark Side of the Moon to be a very curious number 2. As heretical as that may sound. However, Dark Side of the Moon will forever live in glory. This will be one of those albums that will be forever sought out, almost like latter albums from their discography, such as The Wall. This will be albums that generation upon generation will return to, because Pink Floyd will be a band that will be forever talked about because of these great albums. It'll be just like metal fans will probably continuously go back to an album such as the Black Album by Metallica, either that or Master of Puppets, or maybe Rain in Blood by Slayer. They'll go back to that thrash sound because they'll hear it from the people that have lived it, or hear it from the people who have known people that have lived it. Or because of people like us. It'll be like people going back to Led Zeppelin's Zazo, or Number 4, whatever you wish to call it, because of Stairway to Heaven. And of course people will return to Dark Side of the Moon, because these are songs that you still hear on the radio to this day. Yes, Dark Side of the Moon will forever have its place in music history. But it's time for us to move on. It's time for us to see how fame, fortune, and success would affect Pink Floyd, not just musically, but as a band. They're reaching that musical plateau that I speak about, ladies and gentlemen, where everything you touch seems to be gold. But is everything gold in the land of Pink Floyd, or are there problems? Is the very album that actually brought the band all the things that they wanted also the album that aimed to destroy them? Stay tuned.